Breaking news from Buckingham Palace has shaken the entire United Kingdom. A cold and unexpected statement from King Charles may have changed the course of royal history forever. What do you think? Is he protecting the throne or cutting off his own family? Press 1 if you support the king, 2 if you believe he's gone too far. Today, Britain woke up in the middle of a media storm called the Royal Earthquake. King Charles has officially signed and approved an updated line of succession. And what stunned the public the most was this. Both Prince Harry and Prince Andrew have been removed from it, no longer listed among the heirs, no longer entitled to royal privileges. This is an unprecedented move in the modern history of the House of Windsor. According to royal insiders, the king has been considering this decision for months, especially after a series of scandals that deeply damaged the monarchy's reputation. Harry's memoir Spare exposed private royal matters and unleashed a wave of public outrage. Meanwhile, Prince Andrew remains shadowed by his connection to Jeffrey Epstein, the disgraced financier, preventing his return to public duties despite repeated apologies. Analysts believe that with this bold action, Charles aims to cleanse the monarchy's image and protect its legacy. But what truly shocked the world was the timing of the announcement. It came just days after the king's personal physician admitted that His Majesty's health is under close observation. Could this be a sign of an early transfer of power? And if both Harry and Andrew are out, who will be the one to inherit the throne of England? To understand how the royal family reached this breaking point, we have to return to the quiet estate of Sandringham, where the decision took root. In the days before the October 21st decree, King Charles had been staying there under doctor's supervision, pale, weary, but still working from the mahogany desk once used by his mother. The atmosphere, those close to him said, felt heavy, as though something long postponed was finally demanding to be faced. It was Prince Andrew's announcement on October 17th, 2020 that ignited it. Standing outside his residence at Royal Lodge, he had confirmed in a trembling voice, "I am stepping away from all remaining royal and military responsibilities permanently." The words were intended to close a painful chapter, but they did the opposite. Within hours, calls began flooding into Buckingham Palace, demanding deeper reform. Editorials asked how many more non-working royals the British taxpayer should support. The monarchy, still fragile after years of scandal, suddenly looked outdated again. William arrived at Sandringham that evening. According to insiders, father and son spoke privately for nearly 3 hours. They reviewed old precedents, the letters patent of 1917, which first limited who could hold royal titles, the slimmed-down model of King George V, and the cost analyses showing that public support was slipping. But somewhere in that long conversation, the matter stopped being about efficiency and started being about legacy. "Father," William was said to have told him quietly, "you have to be the one to finish what you began." Camila entered near midnight, urging caution, warning that the decision would fracture the family. But Charles only looked out the window toward the darkened gardens and whispered, "So did my mother's coronation, but she still wore the crown." By dawn, the paperwork was ready. Drafts of the decree were delivered to Buckingham for formatting, and the Privy Council was notified to expect an emergency meeting. There was no going back, and while the world slept, one truth became clear within the palace walls. This would not just be a legal act, but a royal reckoning. The first hint that something monumental was coming arrived not from the palace, but from the Times. Just before midnight on October 20th, the paper published a cryptic leak. Senior royal sources confirmed discussions underway regarding a redefinition of active royal status. No names, no quotes, but the implication was enough to ignite speculation. By sunrise, television studios across Britain were flooded with commentators debating whether the king was preparing to redraw the royal map itself. For days there had been subtle signs, the kind that royal watchers notice but the public misses. Beatrice and Eugenie had canceled a charity event in London due to unforeseen family commitments. Harry's spokesperson in California had declined an invitation to a veterans summit without explanation. Even Prince Edward, usually distant from drama, was spotted entering Clarence House for a private audience with the king, It was as though the entire royal orbit had begun shifting towards something unseen. Behind closed doors, the air was taut. Inside Sandringham's drawing room, documents lay scattered across the grand oak table. Letters, parliamentary memos, legal references to the letters patent. Charles sat quietly at the head, his reading glasses low on his nose as William paced the room. "This isn't about punishment," William said firmly. According to one aide who overheard fragments of the discussion, it's about survival. But for others in the family, it felt like betrayal. Princess Beatrice, ever diplomatic, reportedly told friends, "I understand the need for reform, but why must it come at the cost of dignity?" By contrast, Eugenie was furious. She had spent years balancing royal expectation with private work in the arts. "We've done everything right," she told a confidant. "We stayed quiet, worked hard, and still were being erased." Across the Atlantic, the Sussex household was just waking up to the British morning. Meghan learned of the impending decision through an early email from a London journalist. Harry, reading the message, said nothing for a full minute. He had grown accustomed to riffs, but not this. When asked later that day if he had heard from his father, his reply was soft, but cutting. "No, and I won't be calling first." Even Camilla felt the strain. Her attempts to bridge the widening emotional gap were met with silence. "He's made up his mind," she confided to a close friend that evening. And once Charles believes something protects the crown, no one can dissuade him, not even family. That night, the palace corridors seemed unusually busy. Staff moved quietly, carrying sealed envelopes between offices. Senior press officers were instructed to prepare statements for multiple contingencies. The code phrase circulating among aides was Project Clarity. By the time dawn touched the white facade of Buckingham Palace, the document, 10 pages long, stamped with the royal crest, was complete. Outwardly, it was a legal adjustment. Privately, it was an emotional earthquake. Those who had seen the draft said it bore the unmistakable tone of Charles's handwriting, formal yet sorrowful. Near the end, a single line stood out in italics. "Titles are a reflection of service. When service ends, so too must the title." The family would not learn of the final version until moments before the world did. Even the courtiers tasked with printing the announcement admitted to feeling uneasy, as though history were repeating itself. Another royal schism, another wound that would take generations to heal. And so when the bells tolled at 8:30 the next morning, the kingdom awoke not to scandal or death, but to something stranger, a monarchy mourning its own bloodline in the name of renewal. Inside the long, sunlit gallery of Sandringham House, the morning of October 21st began with a silence so deep that even the clock seemed to hesitate. The courtiers who had been summoned for the meeting did not know whether to call it a family council or a constitutional one. In truth, it was both. The table was set with neat stacks of paper, red-backed folders marked Titles Review, and two pens, one for the king, one for the heir. Charles entered first, walking slowly but deliberately, the weight of the crown almost visible in his stooped shoulders. William followed, composed yet tense, his jaw set the way his father's had been in difficult moments. Camilla lingered near the window, a cup of tea untouched in her hands. No one spoke until the king sat down. "I never thought it would come to this," Charles said quietly. "But we can't keep pretending that the monarchy can carry everyone forever." Aides say William laid out the arguments again line by line. The growing public resentment, the cost to taxpayers, the calls from Parliament for streamlining. He showed graphs, letters from supporters and critics alike. "This isn't about punishment," he said, echoing words from the night before. "It's about credibility." Camilla placed her cup down gently. "And what of the family?" she asked. "Credibility won't comfort them." The king closed his eyes for a moment. "They'll have their dignity, but the crown must have its clarity." At 10:45 a.m., Charles signed the decree. The scratching of the pen was the only sound in the room. When it was done, he placed the pen beside the parchment and exhaled. "So be it. Minutes later, the palace's private communications office dispatched the sealed orders. Copies were sent to Clarence House, Windsor, and Kensington Palace. Another was hand-delivered to the Privy Council chamber in London. There, officials were instructed to prepare a formal notice for release to the press within 2 hours. The BBC received confirmation first. A journalist described the moment vividly. Our newsroom went still. We knew we were reading history before it even hit the screen. At 12:30 p.m., the words appeared across the world. His Majesty the King, with the advice of the Privy Council, has approved adjustments to the style and title of certain members of the royal family. The list followed. Prince Andrew, title withdrawn permanently. Prince Harry, Archie, and Lilibet, removed from royal styling, retaining courtesy titles only. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie to be addressed henceforth as Lady. The shock was immediate. Outside Buckingham Palace, hundreds gathered as reporters repeated the statement over loudspeakers. Some cheered, many wept. It's like watching a family portrait being torn in half. One woman told ITV, across the Atlantic, the news hit California before dawn. Cameras stationed near Montecito captured the glow of lights flicking on inside Harry and Meghan's home. By mid-morning, their spokesperson issued a single line. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have no comment. That silence spoke louder than any statement could. Meanwhile, Beatrice and Eugenie, caught off guard while visiting their mother at Royal Lodge, reportedly broke down in tears. We knew it was coming, Beatrice said to a friend later. But not like this. Not all at once. The palace framed it as modernization. The public felt it as mourning. By early evening, the royal press office dimmed the lights of the Buckingham facade, a symbolic gesture of reflection. Inside, Charles sat alone in his study, the final printed decree before him. Camila joined him briefly, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You've done what you believed was right," she whispered. He nodded, though his eyes were fixed on a framed photograph. One of his sons as boys laughing beside their mother in the gardens of Highgrove. For a long while, he didn't speak. Then softly, to no one in particular, he said, "Right is rarely kind." And outside, the rain began to fall, gentle, steady, as though the heavens themselves had joined the monarchy in its quiet sorrow. The morning after the announcement, the United Kingdom felt suspended between pride and disbelief. The tone in London was somber, as if the kingdom itself were grieving. On television, anchors struggled to find words that could soften the blow. In an unprecedented act, one BBC reporter said, "King Charles has redefined the modern monarchy." But beneath the polished phrases lay an unmistakable ache, the sound of a family fractured in plain sight. At Buckingham Palace, the courtyard was filled with a strange stillness. Tourists gathered behind metal barriers, unsure whether to cheer or weep. Some held Union Jack flags. Others held handwritten signs reading "Family First" and "Not in Diana's name." The echo of cameras clicking mixed with the muffled toll of St. James's bells, signaling both history and heartbreak. Across the Atlantic, California woke to chaos. Within minutes of the news breaking, helicopters hovered above Montecito, zooming in on the Sussex's estate. Prince Harry was seen leaving the property in a dark SUV, jaw set, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. Meghan did not appear. A source later told The Guardian, "She's devastated, not for herself, but for the children. They've lost something they never asked for." Back in Britain, Beatrice and Eugenie remained silent, but their mother, Sarah Ferguson, broke hers. Posting on social media, she wrote, "My daughters have always served their country with dignity and kindness. Titles do not define them. Their hearts do." The post gained nearly 1 million likes in hours, a quiet rebellion wrapped in grace. Prince Andrew, who had unwittingly triggered the reform with his statement 4 days earlier, issued a short comment outside Royal Lodge. "The king acts for the crown. I respect that, as I always have." His tone was clipped, emotionless. Yet those who knew him said it stung, the realization that in cleaning the house, Charles had finally swept away the last trace of Andrew's shadow. Inside the palace, The family gathered for what courtiers described as a conversation without smiles. Charles sat at the head of the long table, William beside him. Camilla poured tea that no one touched. The atmosphere was heavy, the air thick with unsaid words. Harry was not present, nor was Andrew. The king's first words were simple. "We have done what must be done." Also, silence followed until Princess Anne, the family's steel spine, murmured, "And what will be left when there's nothing left to take?" Outside opinion was split. Polls released by YouGov showed 68% of Britain supported the decision, citing a need for a leaner, more responsible monarchy, but a vocal 28% called it cold, unforgiving, and un-British. The global press framed it as a Shakespearean drama, a father choosing his duty over his blood. American networks turned the decision into primetime spectacle. CNN called it the Crown's reckoning. Fox News questioned whether the monarchy had gone too far. On social media, hashtags like #RoyalReform, #JusticeForHarry, and #End of the Line trended simultaneously, creating a digital battlefield of loyalty and outrage. Meanwhile, William remained silent, but his demeanor in the following days revealed everything. At an engagement in Manchester, he looked pale, thinner, his usual composure slightly strained. When asked by a reporter whether the family was united, he paused for a moment and replied, "We are aligned in purpose." It was an answer crafted with precision and pain. For Charles, the weight of leadership pressed harder than ever. Those close to him described the king's mood as somber, but resolute. He ate little, worked late, and refused visitors beyond his advisors. "He believes he saved the monarchy," one aide said quietly, "but it's cost him the family that once gave it meaning." As the week drew to a close, a quiet melancholy settled over the realm. The titles were gone, the ink had dried, and yet the unease lingered. No one could quite define what had been lost, except that it felt larger than protocol, heavier than politics. And somewhere deep inside Sandringham, King Charles stared at the fire burning low in the grate and whispered to no one in particular, "Every crown is made heavier by what it must destroy." The fallout was unlike anything Buckingham Palace had seen in decades. The morning after the decree, newspapers hit doorsteps across Britain with one unifying headline: "The King draws the line." Every photo was the same. Charles at his desk, signing papers beneath the portrait of his late mother. The symbolism was inescapable. The son continuing what the Queen once hinted at but never dared to do. But beyond the polished narrative of reform, the human cost was staggering. Inside the family, trust had been replaced with stunned silence. Beatrice and Eugenie retreated from public view, canceling appearances and refusing interviews. A close friend of Eugenie's told the Telegraph she had cried for hours upon reading her name in the official statement. It wasn't the title, the source said. It was the message. It told her she'd never really belonged. At Windsor, Prince Andrew remained hidden at Royal Lodge. Only a short press note was released through his lawyer confirming his respect for His Majesty's wishes. Yet, those who knew him said the statement was a facade. He took it as a final exile. An insider revealed even stepping away didn't save him. Across the Atlantic, the reaction was explosive. American morning shows ran split-screen images of Harry and Meghan in Montecito and Charles at his desk, narrating it like a Shakespearean tragedy. On Good Morning America, a royal historian called it the formal end of the Windsor Brotherhood. CNN's headline read simply, "The day the crown closed its circle." For Meghan, the move confirmed everything she had warned about, that the institution, in her words, protects itself, not its people. Within the UK, however, the response was sharply divided. Older Britons applauded the king's decisiveness. "It was long overdue," one caller told BBC Radio 4. "The monarchy must stand for duty, not privilege." Younger audiences, by contrast, viewed it as ruthless. Social media hashtags, #FamilyOverTitles and #MonarchyOverhaul trended simultaneously, a digital duel between tradition and compassion. Behind palace walls, Camilla became the emotional anchor. She was the only one still speaking to everyone, quietly phoning Eugenie, writing to Harry through private channels, even persuading Charles to take a day's rest. He looks calm, one aide noted. But this has aged him. The king's health, already delicate, faltered under the strain. Doctors at Sandringham adjusted his schedule, advising fewer briefings. Duty must adapt to the man, not the other way around, one physician told him. William, meanwhile, bore the weight of silence. Publicly, he said nothing. Privately, he carried the guilt of being seen as the architect of the purge. I'm not the villain here, he confided to a friend. But I can't say that out loud. His popularity remained high, 72%, according to a new YouGov poll. Yet even the supporters admitted the move had left a cold shadow on his image. And as October drew to an end, the monarchy itself began to settle into its new shape, smaller, sharper, but somehow lonelier. The grand balcony at Buckingham, once crowded during national celebrations, now seemed destined to host only a few figures. The image of a leaner crown looked powerful on paper, yet heartbreak lingered in its reflection. Late one evening, a palace aide returning through the courtyard overheard the king's voice drifting from his study. He wasn't dictating policy or reviewing papers. He was humming softly, an old Scottish lullaby once sung by his mother. For a moment, and the grandeur fell away, leaving only an old man mourning the family he'd sacrificed to save the institution he loved. And in that fragile stillness, Britain was reminded that modernization has a price, one written not in law, but in blood. The storm that began on October 21st had finally subsided, but its echoes lingered across every corridor of the royal estate. Buckingham Palace stood as it always had, movable, illuminated, almost defiant. Yet those who worked inside knew the monarchy had been altered in ways that could never be undone. Titles were gone, names rewritten, and the family that once symbolized unity now carried the quiet ache of division. The official narrative, of course, was tidy. The king's decision was an act of modernization, a necessary step towards streamlining a centuries-old institution. But behind that polished statement lay an uncomfortable truth. Modernization had come at a deeply human cost. Fathers and sons no longer spoke. Sisters felt exiled within their own lineage and the public. The ever-watchful audience to this family's unfolding drama had begun asking whether the monarchy, in protecting its image, had sacrificed its soul. From an analytical point of view, the move made sense. Public opinion had been shifting for years. Polls from YouGov and Ipsos in 2025 showed that more than 60% of Britons favored a smaller, taxpayer-efficient monarchy. Charles, ever the pragmatist, saw this as survival, a way to preserve the institution's dignity in an era that no longer tolerated excess. But what fascinates me as an observer and storyteller is not the decision itself, but what it reveals about human nature when power and bloodline collide. Because what we witnessed was not just royal reform, it was a generational clash between legacy and evolution. William, raised to lead, had learned from his grandmother that duty must outweigh emotion. Harry, molded by pain, believed that humanity must outweigh duty. And Charles, standing between them, chose duty once more, even if it meant alienating his blood. I can't help but wonder if this decision made in the name of preservation will one day be seen as the act that broke the spell. Monarchies survive on myth, and myths survive on unity. By drawing this line, Charles reaffirmed the monarchy's strength, but exposed its greatest weakness, the inability to forgive. Still, there is a kind of poetic irony here. Perhaps this was the only ending possible for a family whose every triumph has been shadowed by loss. History may remember Charles as the reformer who saved the crown from collapse, or as the father who couldn't save his family from itself. Either way, he fulfilled his destiny to carry the burden of tradition into a world that barely believes in tradition anymore. And yet, amid the heartbreak and controversy, there's a deeper lesson for all of us watching. Every family, royal or not, reaches a moment when it must decide between comfort and truth, between what looks right and what feels right. The Windsors simply live that moment in front of cameras. Their struggle mirrors our own. learning when to hold on and when to let go for the sake of something larger than ourselves. For me, the story of October 21st, 2025 is less about power and more about humanity. It's about how even those born to rule are still ruled by the same fragile emotions that bind us all: pride, fear, love, and the endless need to be understood. Maybe in the end, that's why we still care about the royals, because through their flaws, we recognize our own. As the autumn light fades over Sandringham and the king retreats once more into his private study, one imagines him sitting alone, the ink on his decree now dry, wondering if the price of history was worth the quiet that followed. Outside, the flag rises again to full mast, a symbol of renewal perhaps, but also of finality. The monarchy continues, but not untouched. And that is where we as witnesses find our reflection in the balance between progress and pain, in the understanding that even crowns come with cracks. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. What would you have done if you were in the king's place? Would you have chosen family or duty? Let us know in the comments and share where in the world you're watching from. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep royal stories that blend history, emotion, and the human truth behind the palace walls. Because here in this kingdom of tradition and tragedy, every decision echoes far beyond the throne. And sometimes the greatest reforms are born not from power, but from heartbreak. 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 Heartbreak.